Welcome back, listeners. This is the Bloodlines Headlines Podcast. You got Kelsey, Maddie, and Asia in the studio, and today we continue the story of the Central Park Five. This is part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll unravel the courtroom battles, the prison years, the fights for freedom, and finally, the truth that changed everything. April 19th, 1989. A young woman was found brutally attacked in New York City's Central Park. The city erupts in fear. 5 boys, teenagers, barely old enough to drive, are accused. Headlines scream. The media paints monsters. The world watches as lives are destroyed before justice even begins. We'll trace the investigations, the coerced confessions, the trials, the prison years, and finally the truth that emerged decades later. This is a story of fear, manipulation, resilience, ultimate vindication. So buckle in, listen closely, and prepare to feel the weight of a city's failure and the power of human endurance. Now, some of the details you'll hear tonight will echo from part 1 because the road to justice is never simple. But if you'd like the full story, the very beginning, the crime, the investigation, and the interrogations that shaped this case, I strongly recommend you start with part 1 first. For those of you who are caught up, ready to go, let's dive in. The trials are about to begin.
When we left part 1, 5 terrified boys had been pushed into confessions they didn't understand. The city was out for blood. The press called them a wolf pack. Now our story moves from the precincts to the courtrooms, where fear and politics would prove far stronger than facts. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office, led by Linda Fairstein's Sex Crimes Unit, filed multiple charges: assault, sexual abuse, robbery, and riot. Because of New York's juvenile offender laws, 16-year-old Corey Wise was tried as an adult. The others, Antron McCrae, Kevin Richardson, Yusuf Salam, and Raymond Santana, were still legally minors, but prosecutors treated them like grown men. Reporters swarmed the courthouses. Headlines screamed, "Wolf Pack Attack." As journalist Jim Dyer later reflected, by prosecuting the wrong people, they got stuck with a mistake, and they are still invested in that mistake. The city wanted a conviction more than it wanted the truth. Okay, so let's paint this picture. It's the summer of 1989. The city is on edge. The newspapers are printing words like wolf pack, animals, predators. Television news cycles are replaying grainy clips of teenagers being led into police precincts in handcuffs. And behind all the noise, 5 families are sitting in their living rooms, staring at the walls, wondering how their children's lives just collapsed in a matter of hours. Antron McCrae, Kevin Richardson, Yusuf Salam, Raymond Santana, and Corey Wise, 5 boys, 14, 15, and 16 years old, had just signed confessions they barely understood.
I don't think they understood him at all.
No.
To be honest.
Not Corey, anyway, for sure.
No, 100%.
Antron got convinced by his dad, which this is now the episode we can talk about that in, but a little later on.
Which his dad got convinced by the police. So, I mean, all in all, it all goes back to the fucking police and justice system failing these boys.
Some had been questioned for more than 20 hours. Some hadn't eaten, some hadn't seen their parents. They thought if they just said what the detectives wanted, they'd be able to go home. But instead of going home, they were headed straight for the criminal justice system of New York City. And prosecutors were ready to turn their pain into political fuel. Made me think of the Law and Order SVU. Should maybe put that there. Yeah. Anyway. By the time the boys were formally charged, the story was everywhere. Front page headlines labeled them as the Central Park Five. But the truth, the media didn't see them as 5 children. They saw them as symbols of everything white, middle-class New Yorkers feared about Black and Latino youth. Linda Fairstein, head of the Manhattan District Attorney's Sex Crimes Unit, fuck that bitch, can I say that?
Yeah.
Okay. Stepped into the spotlight. She was determined to win this case, not solve it, not prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, just win. Newspapers printed her quotes as gospel. The confessions are corroborated by the evidence, but here's the thing, there was no physical evidence. No fingerprints, no matching DNA, nothing tying the boys to the victims.
Nothing.
Just the stories.
What they did have, hours of taped interrogations. Each boy's story contradicted the others. They got the timeline wrong, they got the number of attackers wrong, they even described the victim's clothing incorrectly.
Taped and coerced interrogation videotapes. Coerced.
But prosecutors spun it differently. Confusion is normal in trauma, they said. Teenagers don't remember everything perfectly. And with the city screaming for accountability, people wanted to believe it. Let's break down the charges, because this is where the machinery of injustice really starts rolling. For Antron, Kevin, Yusuf, and Raymond, prosecutors charged them with assault, sexual abuse, attempted murder, robbery, and riot. Heavy charges for kids who until then were worried about basketball practice, video games, and getting home before the streetlights came on. And then there was Corey Wise, my boy. 16 years old, just a boy, but under New York law, he was automatically considered an adult for certain violent felonies. That meant Corey wasn't just going to family court, he was going to be tried in Supreme Court. His charges: assault, sexual abuse, and rioting. Corey had no idea that walking into that precinct with his friend Yusuf that night would cost him the next decade of his life. Decade! Support. Like, that's all he was trying to do. Even before a jury heard a single word of testimony, the public had already decided. Why? Because the media told them what to think. Reporters wrote about packs of wild teenagers terrorizing the city. Television anchors described Central Park as a no-man's land at night. And then came the bombshell. Donald Trump, a real estate mogul hungry for attention, paid $85,000 for full-page ads in 4 New York newspapers. The headlines screamed, "Bring back the death penalty, bring back our police." Where you at now, Mr. Donald Trump? You apologized to those boys? Have you given those boys $85,000 for ruining their life? Because you probably contributed into the reason that they went to jail in the first place.
Preach.
So where you at, buddy?
No, really.
This is like I got 10 pennies, but and the motherfucker got our government shut down. And he quoted back in 2018 or whenever the fucking government got shut down again, that the president would be a fucking idiot if the government got shut down.
Well,
are you gonna eat those words now, or does that not apply to you? Anyway. Can't stand that motherfucker. Imagine being 14 years old, your face plastered across the evening news, and seeing a billionaire call for your execution. No trial, no evidence, just rage. And guys, we see what Trump has done in today's age and how many people will believe anything that he says, no matter what. How we think it was back then, too. Like, how you think he got to become president of the United States? It's because he made a name for himself. Yeah. He was already well-liked. So, somebody who is well-liked like that, who has money, who has some kind of control, even way before anybody thinking he was going to be the president of the United States, he has influence. Yeah. And then you're so sure of yourself that you spend $85,000 on ads. Why wouldn't those people believe you? Yeah. Who's gonna spend $85,000?
Right. And before anybody comes at us in the comments or anything, trying to give us your political views, whatever, we don't care. Okay, do you boo-boo, believe what you want, hear what you want, say what you want.
This isn't even
this all on you. I don't wanna hear.
This is back from 1989, before he was ever even thought about being president.
Exactly.
He was still powerful, quote unquote, and got people to listen to whatever he said. He was still, quote unquote, a god back then to people too. Anywho.
Take that with what you will.
Behind closed doors, the families were drowning. Mothers begged reporters to believe their sons. Fathers worked multiple jobs just to pay bail and legal fees. Yusuf Salam's mother, Sharon, is that how you say her name?
I think so.
If it's not, I'm sorry. Told the press, "They didn't have to trick my son into a confession. He wasn't raised that way, but they did it anyway." Raymond Santana's father just described walking through the courthouse feeling invincible, like no one in the system could even see. Raymond Santana's father described walking through the courthouse feeling invisible, like no one in the system could even see him. Antron McCurry's father, pressured during interrogation, later admitted he told his son to confess. He thought it would make things easier. Instead, it broke their relationship for years. The truth is, these families weren't just fighting a case. They were fighting an entire city that wanted to see their children as monsters. So by the end of 1989, the stage was set. 5 boys, now defendants. Prosecutors with careers on the line. A city whipped into fear and rage. In a courtroom about to become the theater where truth and lies would clash. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about politics. It was about power, and for 5 boys from Harlem, it was about survival. By the fall of 1989, the eyes of the entire country were on New York City. The headlines had done their job. The boys weren't just defendants anymore. They were the face of fear, the symbols of everything wrong in a city battling crime and chaos. And now it was trial time. The trials were split into 2. Antron McCrae, Yusuf Salam, and Raymond Santana were tried together. Kevin Richardson and Corey Wise would face their fates separately. This wasn't a coincidence. Prosecutors thought by splitting them, they could keep the jury from seeing too many contradictions side by side. It was strategy, and it worked in their favor. Assistant District Attorney Elizabeth Ladier was the face of the prosecution. I don't know if I said her name right, but fuck that bitch.
Facts.
She stood in court and laid out a simple, powerful story. 5 boys, a night of wilding, a woman brutally beaten and left for dead. She didn't need physical evidence. She had the confessions. On tape, each boy told a version of events that prosecutors claimed matched up enough. And not to mention that nothing about this trial was fair. No. There was nobody that you could have picked in that city that hadn't heard about this trial. Mm-hmm. Especially for Corey Wise going into a Supreme Courthouse.
Yeah.
Yep. Where is that justice? Tell me anybody else that wouldn't have thought that was injustice. Mm-hmm. Even back then.
Yeah.
You were supposed to have a jury of your peers, and those peers are not supposed to know anything about your case until it is happening in that courtroom. And then they're not allowed to talk about it outside of that courtroom. Yeah. And you're telling me that not one single juror talked about it outside? Oh, be for real.
Right, be so fucking
for real. Completely different state.
Oh, really?
And they've done that before, so why didn't these boys get that? A different, because Donald Trump paid $85,000 and plastered these ads everywhere. Television people ran with it. This became national news. It didn't just stay in New York City. So these boys were doomed to fail to begin with. I hate this story because it makes it so hot.
That's what makes it a good story for us, because we need that.
And remember, this is the late 80s. DNA science was still in its early stages. To the average juror, the word of a prosecutor and a videotaped confession was more than enough to outweigh the absence of hard evidence. The defense attorneys were fighting uphill battles. They argued that the confessions were coerced, that these boys were tricked into saying things that they didn't mean. They pointed to the contradictions. One boy said the attack happened at one part of the park. Another said somewhere else. The numbers of attackers kept changing. From 2 to 4 to 6. Details about clothing, about the victim's appearance were flat out wrong. On all of them.
Yeah.
You're telling me that not one of these boys could get the clothing right, but oh, by God, they attacked this woman.
Right.
But they couldn't tell you a single thing that she actually had on?
Right, and they couldn't tell you, like, not all of their placements of where they were at were right either.
I bet they didn't play the whole, interrogation tapes.
Oh.
I bet they picked through that and got out with it what they wanted and put it together and was like, here, this is it.
This is good. This is great.
Just to get somebody to blame.
But here's the problem. These were public defenders and small-time attorneys going against the full force of the DA's office. They didn't have resources for private investigators, expert witnesses, or slick presentations. The courtroom became lopsided. Power on one side and kids on the other. Jurors sat in that courtroom every day staring at 5 nervous teenagers in oversized suits, their mothers whispering prayers from the benches. But they also read newspapers during lunch breaks. They saw the nightly news reports. And even though jurors were instructed not to let outside opinions sway them, how could they ignore it?
Mm-hmm.
The atmosphere was electric, hostile, and heavy. The boys were treated less like defendants and more like convicts waiting for a sentence. Witnesses were called, parkgoers who remembered seeing groups of kids in the area, police officers who recounted the interrogations, medical experts who described the victim's injuries in graphic details. The prosecution leaned hard on sympathy for the victim, which was understandable. Trisha Mealy had survived something unimaginable. But what the jurors didn't hear about, the lack of DNA match to any of the boys. The fact that semen collected from the crime scene excluded them all. The hours of undocumented interrogation before the cameras were ever even turned on.
For real.
And back then, did that not matter? Did it not matter that none of the DNA matched to those boys?
I guess not. It's just nuts.
And that none of the semen was, because it was reported as a sexual abuse.
Right.
You have the semen right there, and you're still trying to blame these 5 boys that don't match? That some probably didn't even know what the fuck you were talking about when you were saying your semen was found all over her. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
what? Makes no sense.
Especially Kevin.
Really? Yeah. That poor baby.
Like, Kevin ain't had no, I touched her, but what do you mean? I don't even know, like, no. His face would turn bright ass red. He for real. It was courtroom theater, and the boys were cast as villains before the curtain even rose. Meanwhile, the family sat helpless. Raymond Santana's father tried to keep his son's head up, whispering encouragement whenever he could. Yusuf Salam's mother showed up every day, fierce in her belief that the truth would come out. Antron McCrae's parents were breaking under the guilt his father still haunted by the moment he told his son to just confess.
Just imagine being a parent and, like, just as us being parents. Imagine that. And I mean, I know we can't because, you know, we didn't go through that, and we're not going to go through that. And
no, don't say never. You better knock on wood right now, because all of our babies could get put in the same situation. Wrong place, wrong time is a real thing.
But whenever I say that, I'm talking about being racially profiled.
Okay, that's fair. We won't have to ever go through that. But our kids will be the kids that are fucking standing up for the kids that are being racially profiled.
Right. Facts. Yeah. But just imagine being the parent that is being racially profiled, and knowing how the cops are, and telling your kid how to get home. And then you being the reason, well, not the full reason, but you being the reason that your kid gets locked up for his life.
The one reason, and I'm not trying to dog Antron McCrae's father in any kind of way, because he had to go... He was going through his own shit. He had his own record. I mean, he thought if he didn't get this, he was going back to prison. And his family would have fallen if he would have went back to prison. So, like, I'm not trying to dog him in any kind of way, but it most definitely kind of is his fault that his son was in that predicament that he was in.
Right. But also, even if he wasn't there, right, even if he wasn't there, the police would have pinned it on him for something. They would have figured it out.
It was mothers against the system, fathers against their own shame, families against a tidal wave of public opinion they couldn't stop. By the time the closing arguments came, prosecutors didn't just tell the jury they had the evidence. They told them they had a duty to the city, a duty to the victim. The defense tried. They reminded the jury that children were at the center of this case, that without evidence, all they had were stories made under duress. But it wasn't enough. And as the jury went into deliberation, the boys waited. Would anyone believe them? Would anyone see through the contradiction, the lack of evidence, the broken system? The answer would come soon enough. But when it did, it wouldn't be mercy. It would be judgment. The first trial opened in April of 1990. The prosecution relied on videotaped confessions filled with inconsistencies, wrong times, incorrect clothing descriptions, impossible details. None of the boys' DNA matched the semen from the crime scene, but prosecutors argued the boys must have been there anyway, part of a pack.
A pack that didn't even freaking know each other.
Yeah, some pack.
Right. Defense attorneys highlighted every inconsistency, every missing piece of evidence, but the jury was swayed by the sight of frightened teenagers on camera. Verdict: guilty. Sentenced 5 to 10 years in juvenile facilities. Antron McCrae later said the truth came out, but not that day. Next trial was Raymond and Corey. Raymond faced similar juvenile charges and received a comparable sentence. But Corey's ordeal was different. Tried as an adult, he faced 5 to 15 years in adult prison for assault, sexual abuse, and rioting. Could you imagine being 16 years old and looking at 5 to 15 years in an adult prison?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Grown men.
Pretty scary. So scary. And you're not even grown, like...
Prosecutors played multiple conflicting statements Corey had given, some mentioning weapons or injuries that never even existed. During cross-examination, Assistant DA Elizabeth Lydier pressed him to read documents aloud, highlighting his difficulty with reading. Wise, frustrated, asked, "What does this have to do with my case?" A plea that fell on deaf ears. When the sentence came down, Corey shouted across the courtroom, "You're gonna pay for this. Jesus is gonna get you. You made this up." His childhood ended in that moment.
And I'm gonna try
How sad.
No, really. I'm gonna try and get that clip and put it in so that they can hear just how
And not only that,
scared,
but he couldn't breathe. He could, like, there were so many issues with this poor boy. And you could see it in the courtroom. You could see it. And if anybody had any kind of sense, like, that boy was not capable of doing what they said he did.
No. No.
Not at all.
5 boys, 5 stories, and 5 different paths through the same courtroom nightmare. In this chapter, we're walking case by case, boy by boy, to see how the justice system stacked the deck against them. Raymond Santana. Raymond Santana was 14 years old when he was arrested. A baby-faced teenager from Harlem, who should have been worrying about basketball, his friends, and his Walkman, not life in prison. At his trial, the prosecution leaned heavily on his videotaped confession. The problem? Raymond's confession didn't match the timeline. He named other kids who weren't even at the park that night. He got details wrong about the attack, describing things that were flat out impossible. But the prosecution spun it. They told the jury this is what trauma looks like. Inconsistencies are normal. Raymond's defense attorney pointed out that there was no DNA evidence, no fingerprints, nothing tying Raymond to the victim. But it didn't matter. The jury saw a scared kid on tape saying words detectives fed him, and they believed the tape over his terrified denials in court.
Got questions, thoughts, or stories to share? We love hearing from our listeners. Email us directly at talktous.podcast25@gmail.com. Whether it's feedback, suggestions, or ideas for future episodes, we read every single message. So don't be shy. Drop us a line and let your voice be heard.
Andrew McCrae. He was 15, a quiet kid, loved baseball. His father had pushed him to confess during the interrogation, thinking it would mean leniency. But in court, that decision haunted both of them. The prosecution used his words against him, replaying the confession tape again and again. They painted him as one of the ringleaders. But when his defense tried to argue coercion, the jury wasn't buying it. The prosecutor reminded them, would a child really make this up if it weren't true? Antron sat there, stone-faced, holding back tears as the courtroom turned him from a boy into a monster. And his father, sitting just a few feet away, carried the unbearable guilt of knowing his advice had put his son in that chair.
That would kill me.
Yusuf Salam. At 15, Yusuf was known for being thoughtful, curious, and a bit shy. He hadn't even signed a written confession like some of the others. His case hinged on one thing, the word of detectives. They told the jury that Yusuf had admitted involvement verbally, even though there was no recording. And think about that. No signed statement, no tape, no direct confession, just police officers swearing he said things that he and his lawyer insisted he never did. Still, prosecutors lumped him in with the others, building a narrative of a group attack. And the jury bought it. Kevin Richardson. Kevin Richardson was 14, the youngest one of the bunch. The night of his arrest, police had roughed him up. He showed up at the precinct with a swollen face and a cut under his eye. Kevin told his mother he had been assaulted by officers during questioning, but prosecutors spun that too. They claimed the injury came from the struggle with the jogger. On tape, Kevin stumbled through a confession filled with contradictions. He described the jogger's clothing wrong. He didn't know where in the park the attack had taken place. His timeline clashed with everyone else's. But again, this was the late 80s. First saw a videotaped confession and believed it. They didn't question how or why a scared 14-year-old boy would tell detectives what they wanted to hear. He just wanted to go home. Corey Wise, the oldest at 16, and because of his age, the only one automatically tried as an adult in Supreme Court. Corey hadn't even been on the detective's radar that night. He'd only gone down to the station to keep his friend Yusuf company. But once he was inside, they pulled him into the interrogation room and never let him go. Corey's trial was brutal. Prosecutors painted him as violent, aggressive, and the one who had gone the farthest. But again, the evidence wasn't there. The medical examiner testified that none of the DNA from the scene matched Corey or any of the others. None. But the prosecution didn't care. They told the jury sometimes DNA is inconclusive. That doesn't mean the attack didn't happen the way these confessions describe. Corey was convicted of assault, sexual abuse, and rioting. And because he was 16, he was sentenced to adult prison. This meant Rikers Island. This meant hard time, solitary confinement, and the horrors of a system built for grown men, not children. In 1990, the verdicts came down like thunder. This meant Rikers Island. This meant hard time, solitary confinement, and the horrors of a system built for grown men, not children. In 1990, the verdicts came down like thunder. Antron McCrae, guilty. Raymond Santana, guilty. Kevin Richardson, guilty. Yusuf Salam, guilty. Corey Wise, guilty. The sentences ranged from 5 to 10 years for the youngest four. And for Corey Wise, he faced the harshest, 5 to 15 years in adult prison. Their families wept, the boys stood silent, stunned, not even fully understanding the weight of what had just happened, and the city cheered. For the public, it was justice served. For these 5 families, it was the beginning of a nightmare.
Only because the public got painted a picture that was completely wrong.
Happens still now. Innocence had been crushed under the weight of fear. Confessions had become convictions, and now 5 boys, barely teenagers, were about to step into a world of cages, concrete, and cruelty. The real punishment was only beginning. By early 1990s, the convictions of the Central Park 5 were celebrated as victory. The cities had its villains. The prosecutors had their headlines, but when we peel back the layers, when we look at what really happened, we see a story of wrongdoings stacked on wrongdoings. Wrongdoings that robbed 5 boys of their childhoods and robbed the truth from justice. Let's start with the interrogations. Hours and hours in locked rooms with no food, no rest, no lawyers, and in some cases, no parents. The detectives knew exactly what they were doing. They told the boys they could go home if they just said what happened. They pitted them against each other. Your friend already gave you up. Don't be the only one left out. They promised leniency. Just tell us what we want and this will all be over. And when the cameras finally rolled, those boys, exhausted, broken, scared, parroted back the stories the detectives had already fed them. But what the jury never saw were the hours that came before the cameras turned on. The threats, the lies, the psychological warfare. This wasn't justice, it was manipulation. While the boys sat in their cells awaiting trial, the media was building a narrative of monsters. Headlines screamed words like wolf pack and wilding. That word wilding became infamous. Police claimed the boys themselves used it, describing the act of roaming the streets and causing chaos. But linguists and community members later argued the word wasn't even part of their slang. It was a misinterpretation, something the police and press twisted to paint these kids as predators. And the story stuck. The phrase Central Park jogger became shorthand for fear. For many New Yorkers, the park transformed overnight from an oasis into a symbol of lawlessness. Newspapers didn't just report, they fanned the flames. They published the boys, their photos, their neighborhoods. The presumption of innocence was stripped away before trial even began. And then came one of the most infamous wrongdoings of all. On May 1st, 1989, just 2 weeks after the crime, Donald Trump paid $85,000 for full-page ads in 4 major New York newspapers. The headlines shouted, "Bring back the death penalty, bring back our police." The ads didn't name the boys directly, but everyone knew who it was about. Trump called for the execution of children, 14, 15, and 16 years old, before they ever stood trial. Imagine being a mother sitting at home reading a newspaper that tells the world your child deserves to die. Imagine being 15 years old seeing your city rally behind a billionaire calling for your death. The ads worked. They poured gasoline on an already raging fire. And for decades, they would be remembered as one of the darkest examples of trial by media. By the time the boys were convicted, the public had long since decided their guilt. Talk radio hosts called them animals, neighbors looked at their families with suspicion, jobs were lost, friendships severed, churches divided. The truth didn't matter. The contradictions in their confessions didn't matter. The absence of DNA didn't matter. What mattered was fear. New Yorkers were terrified of crime in the late 80s and early 90s. Crack cocaine, gang violence, poverty, it all fed into a city on edge. And so these 5 boys became the perfect scapegoats, symbols, not individuals, narratives, not children. And everybody was still just okay with it.
Really? Like, perfectly okay with it. Didn't question anything at all. Even with these boys at first saying they didn't do it. And their parents, I mean, yeah, it was back in the time, so, like, what can you really do? But you could have at least stood out more and said, my kid did not freaking do this.
Even the consequence for yourself, because at the end of the day, look at all the consequences they faced anyway.
Right.
Just for being related. Like, you should have at least stood up and been louder.
Right, and look at the media and how it made them look. With just the parents going to the media, it could have helped so much.
But, you know, Kevin and Yusuf's mom, they did what they could. I mean, they were, anytime a camera got in their face, you know, my son didn't do this, blah, 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 like crying to and pleading to anybody that would listen.
They did.
Fairstein and Elizabeth Ledier, fuck them hoes. The prosecutors had the weight of politics behind them. New York's leaders wanted results. The police department wanted a win. The DA's office wanted a conviction that proved they were tough on crime. So instead of looking at the evidence, or lack thereof, they doubled down. They pushed the confessions, ignored every contradiction. They brushed aside DNA evidence that excluded the boys. They convinced the jury that chaos, confusion, and mistakes were just the messy truth of violent crime. But here's the truth. They weren't seeking justice. They were protecting their reputations, their careers, and their legacies. Meanwhile, the human cost grew heavier by the day. Kevin's mother begged anyone who would listen to believe her son. Yusuf's mother calling out injustice at press conferences. Raymond's father battling guilt and shame. Antron's parents' marriage collapsing under the weight of regret. And Corey, already sentenced to adult time, sitting in a cage at Rikers Island, enduring horrors no child should ever face. All because the system decided it was easier to make boys pay than to admit it didn't have the truth. The trials may have ended with guilty verdicts, but the wrongdoings had only just begun. What followed was years of prison time, years of trauma, years of survival in a world these children were never meant to endure. And in that world, they would lose their youth, their innocence, and sometimes even their hope. Next, we step into the darkest chapter yet, the prison years. The chapter where the system's cruelty is on full display. When we think of punishment, we often think of justice served. But for the Central Park Five, punishment didn't wait for a verdict. It began the moment they were arrested. For Antron, Kevin, Yusuf, Raymond, and Corey, prison wasn't a system of rehabilitation. It was a crucible of fear, brutality, and survival. And it was here behind the walls of New York City's most notorious detention centers that the true horror of the miscarriage of justice unfolded. The next years scarred each of them in different ways. McCrae, Richardson, Salam, and Santana endured fights, solitary confinement, and relentless stigma. Kevin later said the isolation hurt more than any beating. Corey Wise entered a harsher world. Rikers Island, the Auburn, and other maximum security prisons. He faced beatings, threats, and months in freezing solitary cells just to stay alive. I wanted to go home, he later told a reporter, describing the hopelessness that shadowed every day. It was in Auburn that Corey crossed paths with a fellow inmate named Mateus Reyes, a meeting that would change everything, and we will get into that shortly. The four youngest, Antron, Kevin, Yusuf, and Raymond, spent the majority of their sentences in juvenile detention facilities, places designed to rehabilitate, but instead they became arenas of violence. Fights and threats were constant. Older inmates and even staff would target them, knowing they were high-profile cases. Each boy had to learn quickly, stay quiet, stay small, and survive. Antron McCrae was often targeted because of his quiet demeanor. Other teens thought he was weak. He learned to read the room, avoid confrontations, but the isolation gnawed at him. Kevin Richardson endured verbal abuse, being called Central Park scum by guards and peers alike. He was small, and that made him a target for anyone who wanted to assert dominance. Yusuf Salam struggled the most with loneliness. He spent hours walking the small exercise yard, trying to stay strong. Letters from his mother became lifelines. Raymond Santana constantly fought the stigma of being publicly branded a monster. Even the cafeteria and common room became battlegrounds of whispers and stares. For these boys, time moved differently. Minutes stretched into hours, days into months, months into years. There were nights when they couldn't sleep because the fear never left them. Nights when guards would harass them for minor infractions. Days when other inmates would physically assault them for notoriety. Then there was Corey Wise, the oldest. Tried as an adult at 16, he was thrown into Rikers Island, one of the most dangerous prisons in the country. Could you imagine being 16 years old and then thrown into literally, Rikers Island is still up there to this day as one of the worst prisons in the United States.
For real.
And you're 16 years old, never been in trouble, never even been to jail before. And they're throwing you in with the big dogs.
And okay, let's be real now. He was not mentally 16.
No.
So that poor baby, like, oh my, I couldn't imagine it. He was so scared.
Yeah.
That's all you can think about.
Imagine a child being placed among hardened criminals. Imagine being forced to navigate that world when you're still afraid of the dark. Corey was beaten multiple times. He spent weeks in solitary confinement, freezing cells, no blankets, no human contact. He witnessed violence daily, fights, stabbings, riots, and sexual assaults. He learned quickly that weakness could be fatal. And yet he survived. He endured years of psychological torment, knowing he was innocent but powerless to prove it. He wrote letters to his mother, letters filled with fear, loneliness, and hope that the system would one day see the truth. After years of pain, years of being labeled criminals, years trapped in cages for crimes they didn't commit, the truth finally began to surface. It started quietly, almost invisibly. One piece of evidence, one confession, one breakthrough that would begin to undo decades of injustice. This is how the Central Park Five were finally exonerated and how the real perpetrator, Matthias Reyes, came forward. By the mid-1990s, questions were beginning to emerge. Legal teams had never stopped fighting. Appeals were filed, motions denied, DNA evidence that had been collected at the scene. The semen, the fibers had been preserved. Forensic scientists discovered something shocking. The DNA didn't match any of the five boys.
Shocking.
What? Not Antron, not Yusuf, not Kevin, Raymond, or Corey. Because it did back then too, right?
Right.
But the system was slow. The city was not eager to admit error. And for years, the boys remained labeled as guilty in the public eye. In 2001, years after the boys were convicted, Matthias Reyes, already serving a life sentence for other violent crimes, confessed to the assault and rape of Trisha Mealy. Reyes was already a convicted serial rapist and murderer. He had been serving time for other violent crimes, and he confessed to attacking Trisha Mealy, the Central Park jogger. His confession was horrifying in its detail. He admitted to entering Central Park that night. He described assaulting Trisha with the same injuries that had been documented in the medical reports. He acknowledged leaving the crime scene and walking away while she was still alive, contradicting the story prosecutors had built around the boys.
Mm-hmm.
DNA testing confirmed Reyes was the source of semen found on Trisha Mealy.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, wow.
This was the evidence that the justice system should have had from the very beginning. He provided details about the attack that had never been made public. Reyes didn't just confess in passing. He led detectives to the location he had been in Central Park that night. He described Trisha's clothing in detail. He explained his movements, his intentions, and his escape. The confession aligned perfectly with the evidence collected at the scene, but had been ignored for years. For five boys who had endured false confessions, false charges, and years behind bars, the revelation was both vindication and fresh agony. Finally, the city had to face a simple truth. The Central Park Five had been innocent all along. Reyes later said he came forward after encountering Corey Wise in prison and feeling haunted by his suffering. The district attorney's office reopened the case. At least he finally gained a heart, though, I guess, because otherwise these boys would still be in
I mean, that's fair.
They reopened on December 19th of 2002. A judge vacated all convictions. Finally, the Central Park Five were free. Not just physically, but legally. Following Reyes' confession and DNA confirmation, the convictions of the Central Park Five were overturned in December of 2002. Corey Wise, released after 11 and a half years, walked free as an adult with his body scarred and his spirit tested. The others, Antron, Kevin, Yusuf, and Raymond, emerged from juvenile facilities, teenagers no longer, burdened with the weight of injustice but finally free from prison walls. Judge Charles Marks ruled that the convictions were vacated. The ruling was clear. The system had failed. The boys had spent years paying for a crime they did not commit. A miscarriage of justice almost impossible to comprehend. Exoneration wasn't just a legal term. It was a tidal wave of emotions, both overwhelming and contradictory. For Corey Wise, stepping out of prison after 11 and a half years felt like walking into a world he no longer recognized. The streets were brighter, the city faster, people unrecognizable. He had missed the births of friends, children, the death of loved ones, the ordinary milestones that define life. There was joy, absolute, liberating joy, but also a profound emptiness.
I mean, I could only imagine. Like, you've just been in a cage for your whole fucking life, basically.
Yeah.
You were in there as a teenager. You barely even just got out of childhood.
You spent your whole life in there. You finally get to step outside and smell fresh air, but it ain't 1989 anymore.
Right. It's all the way in the 2000s.
A lot has changed since then.
For real.
But he had survived. Yet everything he once knew had moved on without him. Antron McCrae spoke of relief mingled with anger. Freedom finally in his hands, but every lost year, every stolen moment of adolescence weighed heavy. He described as strange dishonest. The joy of walking freely with friends contrasted sharply with the lingering distrust of authority. The world was safe now, but only just. Yusuf Salam felt vindication, yes, but also grief. He was proud that the truth had finally come to light, yet haunted by the knowledge that the system had labeled him a criminal for something he did not do. He often described it as feeling released from one prison, but trapped in another. The prison of memory, trauma, and public perception. Raymond Santana struggled to reconcile his public identity with his true self. Newspaper and TV had painted him as a monster, and that perception lingered. Even friends and strangers treated him with suspicion. Yet, for the first time, he could rebuild his life without bars, physical or metaphorical, holding him back. Kevin Richardson reflected quietly on the everyday freedoms he had lost, walking in the park, attending a concert, simply hanging out with friends. These simple joys, once taken for granted, became symbols of a life that had been delayed and stolen. In 2014, after more than a decade of legal battles, the Central Park Five reached a civil settlement with the city of New York for $41 million, a figure unprecedented for wrongful imprisonment in the city.
I just want to point out, they got the true confession, the true motherfucker who did it, and everything. 2002. These boys did not get no money, nothing, no, basically just sorry, till 2014. Boy.
But the settlement was more than money. It was a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a formal recognition that the justice system had failed catastrophically. The city's statement acknowledged the profound injustice. 5 boys, children at the time, had been coerced, tried, and convicted without credible evidence. It recognized the years they lost, the trauma endured, and the lives forever altered. For the men, the settlement was validating, but bittersweet. It could not restore lost childhood.
Nope.
It could not erase the stigma, the public shame, the fear they lived through.
Nope.
It could not bring back the years of ordinary life they were denied.
No, the hell it could not.
Yet it gave them resources and recognition to start rebuilding. Legal assistance, financial security, and a platform to tell their story on their own terms. It was justice delayed, but at last, not entirely denied. After exoneration and the settlement, each man chose a path that reflected his resilience, purpose, and desire to turn trauma into transformation. Corey Wise became a vocal advocate for criminal justice reform. He spoke at universities, on panels, and to lawmakers, sharing his story to educate the world about the dangers of trying children as adults, coercive interrogations, and systematic failures. He focused particularly on juvenile justice, working to prevent other kids from enduring what he had to. Yusuf Salam embraced motivational speaking, traveling across the country to schools, community centers, and conferences. He focused on youth empowerment, resilience, and the importance of self-advocacy. His story became a beacon of hope for children and teens facing injustice or adversity. Raymond Santana committed himself to activism and mentorship. He became a speaker, author, and eventually the CEO of a foundation for youth affected by the justice system, helping teenagers navigate education, employment, and the pitfalls of systematic bias. Antron McCrae focused on family and community rebuilding. He pursued business opportunities, engaging in mentorship, and worked to ensure other families didn't face the heartbreak his family endured. Kevin Richardson dedicated himself to education and advocacy, using his story as a tool to teach others about wrongful convictions, resilience, and the power of truth. He also became a mentor to young men, guiding them away from crime and toward constructive opportunities. Together, these 5 men transformed their pain into purpose. They reclaimed their identities, not just as survivors, but as leaders, mentors, and advocates. Their lives became a testament to human endurance and the power of justice delayed, but ultimately served.
No, really though, like they took this whole situation and they flipped their whole life around.
And if that doesn't tell anybody that they were not guilty to begin with, how did these men, these good men, because they were good boys before they got in trouble, how did they remain good that whole entire time and then came out and still made something of themselves? If they were so bad, if they were such these bad monsters, wouldn't they have come out and did drugs and did all these things that they were trying to say they were doing in 1989?
And wouldn't have they have gotten more trouble while they were locked up?
Yeah.
Or caused more mayhem or anything like that?
Even decades later, they continue to challenge misconceptions, fight systematic injustice, and inspire generations to question authority, stand up for truth, and believe in resilience. The exoneration of the Central Park Five is a story of justice delayed but not denied. It's a reminder of the fragility of truth and the importance of persistence, and the resilience of the human spirit. From coarse confessions to years behind bars, from public condemnation to vindication, the Central Park Five endured what most of us cannot even imagine. And through it all, they emerged stronger, wiser, and determined to ensure their story changes the system forever.
Did this story shake you? Make you question what you thought you knew? Then don't just sit there, hit the like button, share this episode with friends, and comment your thoughts below. We want to hear from you. What part of the Central Park 5 story impacted you most? Your voices matter here, so join the conversation.
Together, the 5 men, Antron, Kevin, Yusuf, Raymond, and Corey, have reclaimed more than just their freedom. They've reclaimed their voices, their stories, and their dignity. Think about it for a moment. 5 boys stripped of their innocence, stripped of their childhoods, labeled monsters by an entire city. And yet today, they are shaping the very system that failed them. They speak to a classroom full of teenagers, teaching lessons they learned the hard way. Resilience, truth, courage, and the importance of standing up even when the world seems against you. They mentor young men in neighborhoods like theirs, offering guidance, hope, and a roadmap away from the same traps they narrowly escaped. They advocate at the highest levels of government, pushing for criminal justice reform, juvenile justice improvements, and accountability in law enforcement. But it's more than activism. It's deeply personal. Every story they share, every speech they give, every young person they save from injustice is a tribute to the childhoods stolen from them. They have turned their suffering into purpose. Their pains have become a lifeline for others. Their injustice has become a blueprint for change. And maybe most importantly, they've proven something profound. Even when the system fails, even when the world believes you're guilty, even when fear and hatred are stacked against you, the human spirit can endure. It can rise, it can inspire, and it can heal. They have taught us all through every lecture, every interview, every foundation, and every mentor session that survival is not enough. True strength is taking the tragedy you endured and transforming it into something that saves lives, uplifts others, and changes hearts and minds. Their story makes you cry, yes, but it also fills you with hope. It makes you believe in redemption, in justice, and in the incredible power of resilience. Because these 5 men, once accused, once imprisoned, once misunderstood, have become more than survivors, they have become symbols of courage, hope, and the unstoppable will to reclaim your life. The story of the Central Park 5 is not only about injustice, it's about resilience, redemption, and reclaiming one's life. From 1989 to today, these 5 men have endured, survived, and thrived. Their courage has inspired millions, and their story serves as both a warning and a beacon of hope. Because even when the system fails, even when the world misunderstands, the human spirit has the power to endure, to fight, and to shine. And that is the story of Antron, Kevin, Yusuf, Raymond, and Corey. Not just victims of a broken system, but survivors, advocates, and leaders of their own destinies. Freedom came first, justice trailed behind. The men, now grown, filed a civil suit against New York City after years of legal wrangling. The city settled for $41 million in 2014. The state of New York added nearly $4 million more. Trisha Mealy, the victim, said of this settlement, "I so wish the case hadn't been settled. I wish that it had gone to court because there's a lot of information that's now being released that I'm seeing for the first time." And former President Donald Trump, who had once taken out full-page ads demanding the death penalty, refused to back down. I don't even think I'm going to comment on that one because I'm not trying to get. Yusuf Salam responded, "There have been few cases of injustice that are as clear and profound as this one, but he's not able to consider that." In December of 2022, New York dedicated the gate of the exonerated at the northwest corner of Central Park, finally acknowledging the truth that had been buried for more than a decade. Yusuf Salam would later tell an audience, "This was the story of how a criminal system of injustice can be turned on its side to produce a miracle in modern time. That miracle came at the cost of loss of youth, fractured families, and scars that will never fully heal. Today, the exonerated five live as advocates, artists, fathers, and businessmen. Corey Wise travels the country supporting innocent projects and quietly funds legal aid for the wrongly accused. Yusuf Salam was elected to the New York City Council in 2023. Fucking cool. Kevin Richardson works with youth sports and music programs. Raymond Santana runs a clothing line called Park Madison NYC. Troy McRae chose a quieter life with his family. They are free men, but freedom can never return the years stolen. The Central Park Five remind us that justice isn't just about guilt or innocence. It's about power, narrative, and the courage to face our own mistakes. Their stories warn us, when fear drives the system, truth is the first casualty. And so this chapter closes. Five boys, once accused, once condemned, once erased, are now men who carry scars deeper than any prison wall. They lost their childhood, their freedom, and years they can never reclaim. But they also found something else: strength, voice, and purpose. Their story isn't just a tragedy, it's a testament to resilience. It forces us to ask hard questions. How many others are still waiting to be heard? How many voices are still silenced behind bars hidden by injustice? Tonight we leave you with their legacy. A reminder that even when the system breaks you, even when the world misjudges you, the human spirit can rise and truth will fight to the surface. This has been the story of the Central Park Five. Not just a headline, not just a case, but a scar on our history and a call to never look away again.
And I just want to throw a shout out that if anybody has not went and listened to part 1, you definitely need to get all of the facts from everything before what was talked about in this episode. And then also, if you have not watched the documentary
Do it.
that is on Netflix, When They See Us, do it, because they did it justice. They did. And you can break it up because it's in like 5 or 6 parts, I think.
Well, I was trying to tell you, I don't remember which one. The Mexican dad.
Raymond Santana's dad.
I did not like his fucking girlfriend.
Yeah, one bit. Yeah.
And of her, just want to throw that out there.
And if you watch it, it'll go more into depth. You can see the actor getting hit in the face by this police officer and the fear in his eyes. And
all of their eyes.
Even all of them will tell you that their actors did an amazing job playing their role.
Yep, they definitely did it justice.
So, definitely watch it.
All right, y'all, we are going to get out of here. Thank you guys for tuning in for part 2 of the Central Park 5. We will see you next week. Bye!
Bye!